So anyone not know me? Okay. So this is my center. My name is Suman Chaudhary. I am a doctor. I'm a chiropractor. I have a health center here. But this is now kind of an expansion of what I do and offer. So this is the third group we've had so far, once a month. And so I've generally had topics I focus on. And of course, the topic for today was, online. It's integrating Christ, Krishna, and Buddha. Not a big deal, right? But I will probably wander and go all over the place in terms of the talk. The first two talks were mainly me talking. And that really wasn't my intention, but that's what it became. My goal today is to incorporate a little more discussion, a little more group meditation, and to see where that goes. But I can't promise anything. So this is very informal. If questions arise, or if you want me to go over something again or explain something, please raise your hand and let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. Okay? I will try to look for confused looks, okay, and I will try to gauge you guys. I'm not going to go over my history so much today because I did that in the first video. My previous recordings are on YouTube. If you search my name, you can find them for now. They're uploaded and you can listen to those. And so my history is on the first one, where I kind of talk about my journey and what I went through to get where I am in my experiences. So I'm not going to really go into that so much today. But just before we get into the bulk of where I want to go, to kind of because most of you have been coming or know me well. And so obviously you like what I have to offer, and you guys are interested and are supporting me. So that's wonderful. So this is growing into something bigger for me. This is a part of a bigger vision that I've always had, and it's slowly, inch by inch, growing. For those of you who have known me for a while, you can kind of know what I'm talking about, but this is now part of a nonprofit that I've created. And the nonprofit's been there for a while, but it's been asleep. Now it's waking up. And so the nonprofit is really an extension of me and what I have to offer, which is really a system of healing and personal development that I've really brought pieces together to kind of create and offer based on my own experiences and my own research and my own expertise and all these things, which includes healing, self-development, and of course, spirituality. So I'm constructing an online community hub, and in that, it's going to be connected to a school with courses and workshops and things of that nature, trainings about a lot of different things, but I'm organizing all of that. And so each one of you will be getting invites soon to join that. And my goal, my vision is it's like a private Facebook essentially. But it's going to be connected to everything else I'm offering. So it'll be connected to the school that I'm kind of basically developing with all of this to have everything I want. And it's going to be open to other people who want to teach and offer anything they want to offer as well. So that's how it's going to be set up. And so it's basically a center of, like I said, healing, personal development, and spiritual cultivation that fits into the system. And the system I offer, as you guys kind of know, is very universal. It's very open-ended. It's very all-embracing, really. So if you're interested in being an instructor or want to teach or be part of it through that channel, let me know as time goes on. And then we can kind of build that in as well. So that's kind of what's happening. And so these videos as well will then be connected to that hub as well. And it'll just continue to grow. So that being said, some of you have already expressed interest in helping me out with that. And so I want this to be a community expanding effort, obviously, which means volunteer help, which means, people who have experience with nonprofits and expanding that, please come forward. Donors, fundraising, all that is kind of where I'd like this to expand into. So just so you know, that's kind of where it's going, and so you'll be informed as time goes on through the emails and eventually the hub. Okay? All right. So that being said, last time I focused on the idea of a roadmap of spirituality. A roadmap that's always been there, a universal system of really connecting to who we are and eventually connecting to what is greater than us. And however far you want to take that, the divine. So there's always been a system to do that throughout the world. And how I described the last few times, different religions, different spiritual traditions, different lineages, different teachers will tap into that in different ways. Some more complete, some in small ways, some will start and kind of veer off. So from what I've seen throughout history, the myriad number of teachers and guides and gurus and lineages are tapping into this universal stream of awakening that literally is wired into our DNA, which is what's amazing. As a human being, it's wired into our DNA. If we tap into it, if we know how to unlock it, like most things start to happen. This is what's beautiful about it. But you have to know how to unlock it. That's the key. Or your karma has to be good enough to have it unlocked as well. But if the unlocking happens with the right guidance, the right tools, the right mindset, then things start to fall into place. Things start changing and transforming. And then some of the answers that we struggle with, some of the questions we struggle with start to get answered. Who am I? Right? Why am I here? What's the point? Right? All the questions that all of you guys have had, which has led you here, right? All of you have some type of spiritual idea, practice, system you've been working with. So we focused a lot on the roadmap last time. So today, I'm going to hyper-focus on some key figures, of course, in history. And of course, these figures have been instrumental beyond words in directing our spiritual direction for thousands of years, right? Christ, Krishna, and Buddha. Now, they're not the only ones, of course, but they're three of the biggies, obviously, okay? So, before we get into them, though, what's important to clarify is the term avatar. Because we use it now in a general sense all the time. Avatar, but what does that really mean? Right? We know what it means in normal use, right? It's a representation of us, either on the phone or in a video game or online, right? And so the general idea is it represents you. And we have the movies. What did they show in the movies? Which is really interesting. Why do they call it that? So, and if you guys want to share, please feel free. If I bring out a question. Mm-hmm. So, why do you think they called it what they called it in the movies?
The central character has an awakening on that planet. Even though he's asleep, his consciousness has an image in that world.
Right.
Yeah. Or it's downloaded into a...
So he's not in his original body, but he's in a different body, his consciousness.
That's right.
Living through that body, right? The way we kind of work with online avatars.
And we forget.
Ah, yes.
Because we are totally absorbed into the story. of what's
Right.
happening.
Right. So we forget. So if we forget, that doesn't usually mean we're the avatar. Because the avatar doesn't really forget. Because in the movie, he never forgets really that he's still comatose aboard the ship, but he's interacting, with the people who live on the planet, right? So he's not forgetting, which is what's key there, I think. And of course, it seems like in the movie they knew what the meaning was, and hence the way they used it. So the term avatar is a Sanskrit term, obviously. It's a Vedic term, and it's got a very specific meaning, which is similar to what we just talked about from the movies and the way we kind of see it. Whatever the being we're looking at, their body, this being is in pure, full 100% awareness of who they really are. Now,
Doesn't the Buddha mean the one who woke up?
the Buddha term, yes, an awakened one. Yeah. So in the Vedic world, there are tons of different terms for different types of levels of awakening, of enlightenment. Is there a chair mic for you? Okay, you're good. So the avatar idea is a central theme specifically from the land of its origin, India, because the avatars were seen as the premier instrumental teachers and or key figures in something big happening. And that's kind of how in the mythologies in India they would depict these avatars, numerous ones, okay? Not just one, numerous ones, because the idea is, the ultimate idea of the avatar in the Vedic tradition is a full embodiment of God. Full. Just like in the movies, he's fully aware of himself being projected into this consciousness. So a Vedic avatar has the full awareness that they are literally God in a form, as a person, as a name, interacting with normal humans, right? So that was the central theme of what an avatar means in the Vedic tradition. Okay? So the idea, as we talked about really like in the first meeting as well, from the Vedic viewpoint, the Vedic my claim is the original indigenous view of God on earth, was that God is here now. God is immanent, as they call it, here and now, amongst all things, but yet also transcendent, beyond all things. And so the idea is, can you conceive of both? Is what in the Vedic tradition they laid out. And most of it is about pulling that apart and helping you really put that together in your mind. So, but from that central basis and idea, this avatar concept emerges where, okay, if God is here and now everywhere, and of course that means, according to this model, God is within you, you are God, but not the way we think when we say it now. Which is, we don't have the awareness of that. We are not acting like an avatar, is the thing, right? We have forgotten, which means we are totally caught up in what's happening. The senses, the material world, everything that we're dealing with here, right? That's what they call the Maya. The Matrix is what they showed in the Matrix, right? Same idea. Those guys knew what they were doing too when they made the Matrix, and they talked about it too, if you ever read some of their, where they got their ideas from. So, but the Maya is this, on one hand, the illusion, but on one hand, the solidified density of matter that we're engaged in, that is so engaging we forget, we get lost, we then lose touch with our true divine nature, and therefore we can't technically say I am God anymore. And if you do, usually you're deluded these days. Usually, 99.9% of the times you're deluded. But it's still possible that you may be right. Very unlikely. But what that means, though, it is possible because if you are in full remembrance, if you are so clear, your body, your mind, your spirit, if it's so clear where the filtering process, and your body and mind is really a filter, if you think of it that way. The brain, the whole apparatus of the brain and the body and the construct of the mind is really a filter. All it's doing is filtering energy and frequency all day long. This very second. Frequencies are moving through us, right? Different forms of it. And either gets stuck or it flows. Plain and simple, if you break it down. And when it gets stuck, that's when it manifests as something. The idea is, right, when energy slows down, we can then see it. A wave becomes a particle when you observe it in physics. Same idea. Something slows down dramatically, it becomes a blockage in the healing world. Same idea. So, if you had no resistance in you, who has no resistance in them? If you had no tension, right? If you had no lingering effects of trauma, who is that? If you had no toxins, you guys are kind of getting where I'm going, right? Only then can you be 100% pure channel, unfiltered, of your true divine spark, which is the spark of God, right? So therefore, one cannot say, I am acting as God, and be authentic about it, because you're not. You're not in a vehicle, in a form to hold that capacity. But the avatar idea was meant to depict you can, there has been, here's who, and in all the stories they talk about, the avatars themselves have avatars. And if you know some of the Indian stories, you kind of know what I'm talking about. They have avatars of themselves who have avatars, and it just keeps going like, a hologram. It's mind-blowing, some of these stories that you come across in the ancient world. And just kind of, sitting with, what we're talking about from the Vedic point of view, right? These characters in the Vedic storylines, Shiva, Vishnu, the iterations of the goddess, Durga, Kali, Parvati, Saraswati, Gayatri. They each have avatar iterations of themselves. And what I'm also holding on to the idea is they themselves were avatars, right? And so everything I'm sharing, though, just so you know, does not align with traditional views. Okay, so when I share a lot of Hindu Vedic viewpoints, it doesn't always align with traditional Hindu viewpoints, just so you know. If you were to ask a typical Hindu off the street, hey, was Shiva an avatar? Or was Vishnu an avatar? No, that's God. And they would argue with me about it. Sure. And I wouldn't argue with them because they're right. But I know I'm also right too, is the thing. And so, in the non-Vedic world, in the rest of the planet, these ancient beings of old that are still in the mythologies, that we tend to kind of ignore and think they were made up, maybe weren't made up, possibly, all in the way we think. And the difference is in much of the ancient world, there's a missing element of these enlightened gods and goddesses. Because, how many enlightened Greek gods are there? Really? They don't really talk about that. Or how often do the Norse gods interact with some enlightened humans? How many stories do we know of that? I mean, there probably are. I'm not an expert in some of those things. And even in the Judeo-Christian world, right? We talk about some of the patriarchs and how wise they were. Enoch, Moses, these key figures. But they're pigeonholed in their own categories, right? They're not really avatars. They're just wise, old guys that are part of our system, that handed down these traditions. So, but in India, in the bulk of ancient India, this idea was intact that, okay, hey, we got all these fabulous, amazing beings who can do all these different things throughout the cosmos and on Earth, along with humans, and some of them are pretty wise. And we're going to learn from them. And so that's, in my opinion, Shiva, Vishnu, some of these great beings in Indian mythology were actually walking on Earth, in my opinion, at some point, that we can't even conceive of at this point. So in that sense, they were walking avatars. So getting to Krishna, getting back to the topic, Krishna. We're going to start with Krishna, then go to the Buddha, and then Christ. But the reason I chose those three specifically is because the spiritual focus that we have of them is how I should say, that we still have intact of what we think they taught. Okay? Because we really don't know what they said or did. I mean, think about the game of telephone. Think about, what we do now with mass media and the stories we regurgitate and change. And we don't think some of these stories from the Old Testament, from the, Indian Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the ancient mythologies of the world, haven't been changed and altered and added to? It's kind of inconceivable, otherwise. So that's why I say what we still have intact that's available to us from these key figureheads is what I'm focusing on. And so with Krishna, who has no familiarity with Krishna? Or very little? Okay.
When was he?
It's a great question. And we don't really know.
Okay.
But there are theories. And kind of what's wonderful now is because of YouTube and mass media and everything, there's a lot of awareness on a lot of researchers throughout the world focusing on some of these questions. When was Krishna alive? Right? When was Moses alive? Or when were some of these key figures in history? What actual evidence is there of that? That's a whole rabbit hole. Fascinating. But Krishna, the Hindu viewpoint is based on, he's from a previous age, right? The Vedic viewpoint is time is cyclical, and time on Earth, time in the universe is cyclical. And as you go through these cycles, you experience different things. And it's based on the typical ancient idea of the Golden Age, the Dark Age. The golden, silver, bronze, and dark, how they talk about it in the West. But in the East, they have their specific terms for those, but same idea. The Golden Age is when your filter is a lot clearer in your mind and body. The energies are a lot different on the planet. So it's much easier to be connected to the divine. And some of the ancient lore, that's when they would talk about, that's when the gods walked amongst men. That's how they would describe it, even in Greek mythology. That's when they were walking with humans, because they could. Things were different. It's a fascinating idea to go down, rabbit hole. But then that lasts for a certain time, and things change for whatever reason. Different theories go into the precession of the equinoxes. Some of you may know the 25,000 year cycle of the zodiac. All these things are connected, very fascinating. But the idea is then things shift on the planet, and then gets into the third age. Was Tolkien getting into something when he talked about the ages of, the ancient ages? Very interesting, right? And then the second age, first age being the golden age, second age, third age, where they talk, like, for example, in the golden age, you can't lie. You just can't. It's impossible. It's not a thing. It's not in your conception to be dishonest. Imagine that, right? And the idea is the divine energies from the central sun start to get further and further away. Therefore, it's harder to stay connected as the ages progress, is the idea. So by the dark age, the material forces are the strongest on the planet, and therefore they affect us the most, and therefore it's easier to fall into your shadow, is the idea. You're more disconnected from the divine, right? Therefore, we're in the Vedic view, the dark age right now, the Kali Yuga is what it's called. When does it end? A lot of theories. Is it ending? A lot of theories. Everyone has their own theory. It is connected to the age of Aquarius, as we talk about in the New Age. All these things are connected. How? A lot of theories. Tons of books out there with different views. Okay? When is the shift happening? No one knows. Some people say it's happening, it's going to happen. Nobody knows, but everyone has a sense. Things are changing. That's how we kind of know, right? But that's kind of it. But the point is, the ancients would talk about these changes. It's happened before, is the thing. And that's kind of my beef with the current New Age, like it hasn't happened before. No, it's happened before. Many, many, many times. In many different ways. These shifts have happened. So, before this dark age, in that age was when Krishna was alive, according to the Vedic view. Because his death marks the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And he spoke about that. With my death, the Kali Yuga will be heralded forth, is how he described it. The dark age will descend. Therefore, I am giving you these teachings for you guys to remember to help you out, because you'll need them. Is what he specifically said. So he's a central figure in the Hindu religion. He is considered a historical figure, except in mainstream history. But we're not sure when he was alive because his story is pulled out from a more epic story called the Mahabharata. It's the longest epic story in all of literature. And I think I never get this right. I think if you take Homer's Iliad, times it by 10, I think you get close to the length of the Mahabharata. It's that big.
And the Odyssey combined.
Yes.
Times 10.
Right.
Wow.
It's immense.
Is the Bhagavad Gita part of
It's
the
part of it.
Very small.
Yes. Because the Mahabharata is a massive drama story of two families going to war with all kinds of characters and histories and things happening. I wish Peter Jackson would make a trilogy on that, right? It would be mind-blowing, the stuff in there. It'd be like Lord of the Rings on steroids, literally. For those of you who've ever kind of looked into Mahabharata, everything is in it. But the key storyline is there's a war that occurs, a massive war. And that's kind of one of my side projects is to kind of go down some of these rabbit holes. But they mention in the Mahabharata that I think 4 to 6 million soldiers died. Forget the exact number. Million male soldiers died that they specifically mention in that war. Which, a lot of people are trying to go down the rabbit hole to kind of pinpoint what When were there 4 to 6 million soldiers on the planet fighting back in ancient history? And what we know is, archaeologically, we know there have been bottlenecks in the Y chromosome. I'm going down a rabbit hole right now, but we know suddenly Y chromosomes have dropped in ancient history dramatically, and we don't know why, to where it almost was near extinctions of Homo sapiens, and then they came back. But it's happened a number of times. The most recent one was around 5000 BC, which is interesting. And there were iterations before that too. Therefore, there are certain Indian researchers that are trying to pinpoint the date of the Mahabharata to 5000 BC, based on that as one evidence point. But what's interesting is, in the Mahabharata, everything is based on astrology. So before they do something, they recorded the configurations of the stars, which is really mind-blowingly fascinating. Before this happened, here's where the stars were. When this person died, the stars were in this configuration. And so people have tried to track with software now, backtrack the configurations and the dating. And that also kind of pinpoints to this controversial 3 to 5000 BC time period. But I threw a wrench into that because it still doesn't fit, because the stuff they talk about in there is so extravagant. Because in the war, they talk about weapons of mass destruction, literally, where missiles with fire shooting out from the back would hit masses of soldiers and incinerate the horses, the elephants, and soldiers instantly into dust or melt them. What does that sound like? Right. So they had that stuff around 5000 BC. If they did, why only in India? Why didn't the rest of the world have? Maybe they did, but it's gotten lost. My assertion is, these star configurations that I mentioned, which is what's interesting, it's based on the precession, which happens every 25,000 years, right? For those of you who know into astrology, it repeats. The constellations repeat their configurations every 25,000 years, roughly, right? I think it's like 26,000 something years. We don't know if it's 5,000 versus 5 plus 25,000, or 5 plus 25 plus 25. Do you follow what I'm saying? I mean, that just kind of blows my mind. We don't really know when they're talking about. And for those of you who are into Graham Hancock, right, and been following, we know that civilization has been around before the end of the Ice Age, 12,000 BC. But that's a whole different rabbit hole to kind of get back to your question, okay? So he's extracted from that story. In the story, they're going to war. Two families are going to war. On one side, he takes the role of the chariot driver for one of the main heroes on one side. It's 5 brothers on one side versus 100 brothers on the other side, and they're both cousins. Okay, so they're fighting amongst each other over the kingdom. I'm not going to go into the story. You can read about that online. But so Krishna offers to be, he gets assigned to be the chariot driver for one of the heroes on one side, Arjuna. Because Krishna, what's interesting is Krishna went to both sides and said, hey, I'm not going to take sides here. I'm going to ask you, what do you want? Do you want me to be your chariot driver? Or do you want my small battalion of soldiers to fight with you? Well, the 100 brothers picked the soldiers. This side picked Krishna to be with them, which is interesting, right? So Krishna then becomes a chariot driver. Before the war starts, the brother, one of the characters, Arjuna, breaks down and goes, I can't fight. These are my kin. These are all my relatives. This is crazy. And that's when the Bhagavad Gita unfolds, which means the song of God. Gita is song. Bhagavat is just a term for God. In Hinduism, there are innumerable terms for God, just so you know. Okay? So Bhagavat is one term for God. Therefore, then the Bhagavad Gita is the extract from that, where Krishna, almost like in the story, like time stops, Krishna gives a full lecture for days, it seems like, in this like bubble, and Arjuna's like listening, like asking him questions, and then finally convinces Arjuna, look, Arjuna is finally like, okay, I understand life and reality and everything. I'll do what my karma is dictating. So there are a lot of different layers to this. But the point is, that's where Krishna comes from. He's the character in that. And aside from that, though, he has a whole myth and storyline that's interwoven into the whole Mahabharata, in that he was born, he had parents, he had a childhood, he was had very similar attributes to Christ's childhood, which is very interesting. And a lot of people take this and run with it too in their own ways, right? His uncle was after him, right? He was born a virgin. His mother was. He did miracles, especially at a young age. Like, there's a lot more detail about his childhood than there is of Christ, obviously, that we still have as of now. So the point is, he has a whole storyline where then he becomes deified in the Hindu lore over time. And in the Bhagavad Gita, he takes on the persona of an avatar now. And he becomes the prototypical symbolism of the avatar. In that, he proclaims, I am God. Very boldly, similar to one other guy that came later. Now, of course, Krishna did not say, I am the only way. Which, did Christ say that? Who knows, really? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, Krishna proclaims, I am God, in the context of the Vedic tradition that we talked about in the beginning, right? We are all sparks of God. But I fully remember. I know that. Therefore, I am speaking to you, Arjuna, from that point of view. And this is what I have to say. And the whole Bhagavad Gita goes into that, right? Talks about all these esoteric concepts. Reincarnation, karma. And more importantly, why I focus on Krishna is he outlined what I then touched upon last time, a roadmap to reconnecting with God. That was the thing. He specifically outlined how to is the thing. That's why, in my opinion, he was a central figure in spirituality as we have it now on earth, because he outlined a specific method, a path to do that. And in his path, it was not exclusive, which again is a hallmark of the Vedic tradition, obviously. So it's nothing new, but he laid it out very clearly that there were two ways and means to go about this. You want to realize who you are? You want to be at peace and awaken? There are two ways to do that. The Christ and the Buddha fall in those two ways, which I'll get to. That's how they're connected. But in the beginning, Krishna then describes the path of the heart and the path of wisdom. That's it. Therefore, again, these were not new concepts in India, obviously, right? But the path of the heart is called bhakti in Sanskrit, in the Vedic world. Bhakti means devotion, surrender, relationship to God, right? What Christianity aspires to, what Islam aspires to, what elements of Judaism aspires to. Anyone with a personal relationship to the divine aspires to this way of being through the heart. And the idea is transcending your body and mind through the heart. That's the path of bhakti, of devotion, right? So, he specifically outlined that in the Bhagavad Gita. What do you need for devotion? What is devotion? What is real love? What are the key elements of love? You need something to focus on to love it, right? The subject needs an object of love at the most basic level. Is how our human experience is of it, right? You have to love something. Something, someone, pet, animal, human, idea, your work. Right? What does that mean? You are devoting all of your energy to that. You are funneling and focusing your vitality on something other than yourself. Right? That's how we practice love, don't we? To then make it unconditional, the highest ideal, right? No matter what the object does, I still love it. I still love you, no matter what you do. We're, in a sense, whether we know it or not, trying to aspire to that. It's hard, right? Except maybe if you're a mother or if you own a pet. Other than that, it's really hard. Mother or father, but generally it's really hard with anyone else or anything. Anyone is, that's kind of where our tests of love come in. Therefore, the idea is you need something to focus on, to channel your devotion. So the idea of bhakti, or spiritual devotion, is what? Well, you focus on the greatest ideal that you can think of, God. Right? That's the point of most modern day religions as we have it. Focus on Christ. Focus on God, some form of God, or something greater, great spirit, whatever you want to call it. And the epitome is, as Krishna outlined, your focus becomes so powerful and one-pointed, you transcend attachment to yourself, your mind and body, and you start embodying what you're focusing on. Isn't that what kind of love ends up doing? You focus on it so much, unconditionally, there's kind of a unification, isn't there? You become one with what you love. It's kind of hard to think about with a person, but the idea is there's a union. And even in romantic love, we kind of talk about it that way. We're one, right? There's a synchronicity that happens, a merging, a oneness. Well, that's the point. Devotion gets so strong, so you literally merge with God. Imagine that. That's the idea. That's the point of spiritual devotion, bhakti, the path of the heart. You see, transcending the small self, connecting to a greater self, and if you're successful, but in between, there are stages and iterations. And in very developed bhakti traditions in India, for example, they would get into that. They would talk about how the relationship progresses. First, God is a friend. Then God becomes like a parent. It's kind of how we kind of talk about God in the Christian world, right? Mother, father, father in the Christian world. But in other parts of the world, mother is also God as a parent. Then, in specific devotional sects and lineages, God becomes a lover. If any of you are familiar with Rumi, right? His works, especially the Sufi tradition, that's how they talk about God. God is the beloved. Rumi continuously uses the word beloved. Who's he referring to? Right? Well, the beloved within being the God within, same idea. So Sufism is this mystical aspect of Islam. It's the bhakti tradition that's within Islam, that's there, but most people miss it, unfortunately. So, that's the path of devotion. Right? We can kind of understand that. Christ, who then comes, we know pretty much about 2,000 years ago. We can pinpoint him down pretty well. He came as the embodiment of devotion. And he said the same thing, I am God. The way is through me. He's not lying. But he was so clear. His filter was so clear of his mind and body. He was an avatar. Right? Therefore, when he said that, he was being authentic. And so the idea is he was giving people something to focus on. Himself. In the same way they would talk about in ancient India. We're so visual as humans, right? We need to see something usually. So if you have something to look at, you can really focus on it and really bring it to you, love it, embody it. So therefore, imagine having a human in front of you who's embodying this level of divinity. Imagine being amongst their presence. And that's what would happen, right? With Christ, in the stories, you'd be in his presence, instant transformation, instant healing, instant awakening around him. Satan being cast out instantly by a touch. Because he's literally embodying this idea of divinity. He is an avatar. And so he was giving people an object to focus on, himself. Because as they described in the ancient Vedic scriptures, it's hard to focus in general. Hence why you meditate. It's hard to focus in general. To focus, you need an object to focus on. So if you have a living embodiment of the divine to focus on, you can't get better than that. Wow. But what happens when the living embodiment goes away? It is not there. What do you have? You have the memory or the picture. Or, as was practiced in most of the ancient world, a statue. Interesting, right? A statue. Yes?
I just keep thinking, I wonder how fascinating it would be if everyone turned that love back in on the illusion of self and healed all of the illusion that resides within.
That's what happens. Exactly. If you're successful, that's what happens. But then you can also directly focus on doing that yourself. Yeah. And that's what the path of wisdom is more that. Because the path of wisdom, we're going to get into in a second, with specifically the Buddha and a few others, how to go about looking at yourself. Because the path of devotion, you're not trying to look at yourself, is the thing. You see? There's a lot there, but you're not focused on that. You're focused on the greater other. And in doing that, if you're successful, the self transforms. And there are pros and cons to it is the thing. Which is really interesting, and these things were outlined in the ancient world, the pros and cons. There are pros and cons to the path of bhakti and devotion. And Krishna specifically said that. And he said, during the Dark Age, it will be easier for people to have devotion than do the path of wisdom. Therefore, I recommend the path of devotion, is what he specifically said. Very interesting. It will be easier to do that for most people. Because most minds will be very fickle and unable to focus. Too many distractions. He knew that. He knew what was coming, I guess. So, when you have something to focus on in the distraction, it's easier to focus on it, especially an embodiment of a person who then you can deify. It becomes a symbol of the divine. So what gets confusing is, from the Western point of view, and you go down this road, idol worship. Right, there you go. What about idol worship? Everyone kind of like, unless you're like Hindu, or pagan, or, indigenous.
The more the merrier.
Indigenous are worshiping rocks and animals, same thing, in a different sense. But the Christian mindset is like, ooh, what's going on there? And so this is, in my opinion, this is the misunderstanding that developed over the last 2,000 years with this idea of devotion, a devotional object, right? Because then what, especially with the doctrines of Paul, what happened then, of course, is Christ became the only object. The only object. Because you're doing that to Christ. You're worshiping him as an idol, right? And Catholics even still have a cross they look at in church. And Protestants don't do that. Islam doesn't do any of that. So the point is, you're still focusing on something. The Protestants focus on an idea now, and a general story of Christ, and what a theology of the personality of Christ without a form. Okay, great, but that's still focusing on something. So the point is, the ancients would say it doesn't matter. It's really easy to focus on a statue. Is it not? It's right there in front of your face. And if it's appealing, you like it. If it's of someone you really adore and think is the greatest in the world, wow, don't we look at pictures all the time of our relatives? Of our ancestors? A pet that passes away? You look at it all the time, right? Out of adoration. Is it idol worship? Well, in a sense it is, but you got to hearken back to what was Moses really talking about when he criticized idol worship. Of course, that's where it comes from, right? The Ten Commandments. When he comes down from the mountain and his folk are, dancing around the golden calf. What's going on there is the bigger question, right? You shall have no other gods other than me, which implies there are other gods. So it was simply drama. Was it simply drama? Hey, I'm the best? Don't focus on those other guys? Maybe.
But aren't all of the Hindu or Sanatan Dharma gods aspects of?
Yes.
So if you understand that it's the same thing.
Right, exactly. That's why from the Hindu point of view, it doesn't matter how or what you focus on as God. Because remember, the idea is God is here and now. God is in all things. So there's nothing that's not God. And therefore, if you then focus on an avatar of God, a human embodiment, although not all avatars in Hinduism were human. That's a different thing. If you focus on a human version of an avatar, that's very relatable. We do that all the time. It's a natural human function. And therefore, if you can heighten your focus, the way Krishna talked about, into devotion, you then create this union with that being, and what the being embodies, pure love, pure wisdom, pure divinity. That then brings you entrainment in physics, entrainment, you start to resonate with that, right? That's what the idea of entrainment is. That's the idea. You start resonating with that, and that's what Tantra is based on. Tantra embodiment practices in the East are doing the same thing as a practice. They're focusing on a deity to embody those qualities, to heighten those in you. That's all they're doing. Under the context that God is in all things. As the native talks about the stone being grandfather. As an embodiment of Great Spirit.
And would like the images also represent like an emotion or something?
They can, yeah, exactly. That's more
You see
in...
Mary and baby Jesus, you're like, oh, nurturing.
Right,
God.
exactly.
So,
Evoking certain emotions. Again, embodying, awakening certain energies.
yeah.
And what if you were, and this now gets into, in my opinion, the higher aspect of esoteric Christianity, what if you meditated on that? Right? Evoke the compassion you see Mary looking at baby Jesus as the mother to a child, and that love, and you focus on that.
Yeah.
What would happen then?
And then the reverse of Christ on the cross and like, the pain and the suffering, and you just focused on that. What would that bring you to? Like,
Exactly. Focus on how can a human be experiencing that much pain, but still have compassion for those who inflict suffering on others. Right? That's Buddha level mindfulness.
Well, and this is what the mystics do in any tradition. They're up
Yes,
there on the edges,
exactly.
doing it differently.
Right.
yeah, so different.
Right. The mystics are on the same road to the avatar, but the avatar is here. They're the pinnacle of human realization, right? And the mystics are on the road to that. As are all of us here today. We're on the road, but that's what's going on.
The winding path to the top of the mountain.
Exactly. So Christ was the avatar from this point of view, embodying the path of devotion. Love. Love God. Love me as God. Christ is God in the theology, right? Christian theology. And a Hindu would say, yeah, sure. Of course. But so are you, but you don't remember, and so are you, but you don't remember, but so are you. You kind of remember, but so is that, and they really remember. Christ fully remembered.
And then the whole salvation story of inviting Jesus into your heart is really the symbolic of
Exactly.
Christ within.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Now, of course, the avatar is, the truer concept of avatar, you are born knowing, is the idea. In the Vedic tradition, the true avatar is they are born knowing in full awareness. Imagine that. And hence, you have stories of some of these beings in childhood acting that way. For example, stories of Krishna just doing miracles when he's 5, 2, 10. Imagine having a kid like that. How do you raise that? You need a special mother, right? And a father. You need a different time, a different age to be able to do that. So, then the path of wisdom. In Hinduism, it's called Gyan, wisdom. Gnosis actually is similar. It comes from the same word, same root word. The Gnostics, that whole idea is the same idea, wisdom. And embodying that, which is, like you were saying, that's where you use the mind to look at yourself. To decipher, discern, dissect, look through, to realize who you are. You're not using an external object. You're not funneling your focus through your heart and devotional on something else to embody it. Now you're going within yourself, looking through with practice and to the best of your ability until you can see the truth. That's the path of wisdom. That's what the Buddha embodied, like no one else. Before Christ, after Krishna is the idea, he came. Exactly when, we're not sure either, but we think we know, 500 BC-ish, but That may not be it. So then he comes, yes?
What is their language in the East and in the Indus Valley? I think of the Western mind and how the Western mind is very, maybe more wisdom oriented if there's
Yeah.
a path. I feel myself that way. And I'm wondering if literacy has anything to do with that and the scientific method and how that all became.
Oh, you want me to go down a whole different rabbit hole, don't you?
Don't do it.
I can't help it now. I have to. Because I love that topic, but it is connected. For those of you who don't know, the Indus Valley, who doesn't know? Indus Valley was the ancient civilization in North India. And they found remains there. Two very popular cities, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, were two, and now it's expanded. But now they've realized the area mass of the Indus Valley, you could fit all of the Nile Egyptian civilization, all of the Sumerian and the Mayan within the Indus Valley civilization. It was that big, is what they're finding. Is that was that expansive, and it keeps pushing westward, infringing upon the Sumerian ruins, which is very interesting. But that's a whole different rabbit hole. Were they the same? Were they, similar? Which they probably were. But the point is, the Indus Valley it's pushing back the timeline, just like Göbekli Tepe has pushed back the timeline to 10,000, 12,000 BC of humans doing cool stuff. So Indus Valley is pushing back the timeline of civilizations, and in other places around the world too. But in terms of in Indus Valley, it's the earliest layers are pushing 8,000, 9,000 BC, the deepest, earliest layers. And like the height of the Indus Valley was more around 3,000 BC-ish, 4 to 3,000. It's very contemporary with Sumer in Egypt. But they had a script, the Indus Valley script, that up until recently, I think like a few years ago, it was undecipherable. And no one knew what they were saying, but it's starting to be deciphered now, very interesting enough, with certain Indian researchers who are using computer programming and coding to figure it out. But they're seeing that the script was different, but they spoke Sanskrit in the Indus Valley, which is very interesting. Because the script of Sanskrit has changed over history. The script you have, if you open up a book in India, you see what's called a Devanagari script. It's the way it's written, right? So that used to be what's called Brahmi, a different script of ancient India. Slightly different. Imagine like the A looking different in English, right? We can kind of tell, but it's kind of different. So before Brahmi, the script was the Indus script, essentially, is what they found. But they were speaking Sanskrit, or variations of that. The Buddha spoke Pali, which is a dialect of Sanskrit. So different regions of India spoke different versions. The South Indian languages are a different outlier, but they are connected. But the point is, in the Indus Valley seals, as they call SEALs, they're like depictions and figurines they found with images. They found depictions of Hindu-based stuff, of Shiva meditating, that they think is Shiva. It's the famous Pashupati seal, where this male is sitting in full lotus is meditating with animals around him, and he seems to have horns. There's a whole different rabbit hole, horn deities in the ancient world. But Shiva is considered the lord of the animals too in Hinduism, right? So many people attribute this being as Shiva. But the point is, there are other things like that that are getting back to this idea that the Indus Valley was based on the rivers that were there, the Indus River and the Saraswati River, which were in North India. The Saraswati River is gone. It's dried up for the past 5,000 years. At least it's been gone. But they found remains of it, which were most of the civilization was running along, and they speak of the Saraswati in the Vedas. The mighty Saraswati. Most of the Vedas is about the Saraswati River. what was happening, and how it was a raging river, and then eventually dried up. And then we know from satellite imaging that Saraswati was there for hundreds of thousands of years in northern India, and dried up at least 5,000 to 6,000, 7,000 BC, was gone. So they mentioned the Saraswati in the Vedas. So that means the Vedas is at least that old, you follow?
Mm-hmm.
But in mainstream books, you open up, the Vedas are 200 BC, 500 BC, 1,000 BC, nothing more than that. So the point is, in the ancient, and I talked about this in the other talks, in the ancient Indian world, these wisdom keepers were so prevalent and so strong in their presence. They permeate the culture. The ancient rishis, the Maharishis, these great saints and enlightened beings, they permeate the culture in the myths, in the stories. They're the ones interacting with the gods and setting them straight, which you don't find in the other mythologies of the world, which is very interesting. So these wisdom keepers were the ones who then held the knowledge and passed it on in India, that kept it intact. But my assertion is these wisdom keepers were in the ancient world all over the world. And you see references, for example, like in the Sumerian stories during the great flood of ancient Sumer with Gilgamesh, and when the flood happened, in that storyline, well, after the flood, 7 great sages restarted humanity again. Who are they? Well, in ancient India, they talk about that, who they were, in detail. The 7 to 10 great sages, who are almost like immortals, who are just always around, and who are the gatekeepers, the wisdom keepers, and they are the restarters of humanity again and again and again. You know, the Egyptian storyline has the same thing. These sages help restart humanity after their great flood. Right? Of course, we have that in the Central American stories of these great teachers coming to help kickstart the Mayan, the Incan civilizations. But I
just had an interesting thought that what if those 7 sages are the same thing as the 7 spirits of God that are talked about in the Bible?
Now, again, that gets into another rabbit hole that you're pulling me into.
I think all the religions are practically saying the same thing, but they're just being said through different constructs, different views of perception.
Yeah. And you have to then go to the Old Testament, right? In the Old Testament, and this is where kind of the Judaism kind of comes to the forefront in terms how they talked about the hierarchy. There was a hierarchy in Judaism that was very evident. Archangels, angels, seraphim, cherubim, these beings, these agents of God, right? That are part of everything, affecting us, affecting creation, right? They had a specific hierarchy of beings. In the same way that the ancients talked about it in different ways. You know, Hinduism said the same thing. There are a hierarchy of beings in the cosmos. And the humans are part of it right here, is the thing.
We're like the lowest angels. I was learning, but I don't know if you think that.
I mean, all that is debatable. It's all, you can go down rabbit holes and, you know, all kinds of different ideas. But I would say that's for a different time.
What was the word for the wisdom tradition? The first was bhakti.
So, back to, thank you. So, bhakti yoga. Yoga means path. Bhakti means devotion. Gyan. Gyan. You see it spelled Gyan, Gnan, Jnana, Jyana. It's highly confusing in English.
It's like the word Gnostic.
It's what Gnostic comes from. Gnosis and Gnostic, yeah, same idea, Gn. Yeah. But in the Indian language you say Gyan. That's how you kind of say it. So that's the path of wisdom. That's the path of really more hardcore meditation. Bhakti is supposed to have meditation. Krishna outlined bhakti devotees should be meditating. But most bhakti devotees don't meditate. That's kind of the con of bhakti yoga. Whereas meditation plays a central role in the wisdom path, obviously in Buddhism. But it's the idea of knowledge. But knowledge not in the sense that we talk about knowledge, but higher transcendental wisdom and knowledge. The truth of things. And of course, this is what I mentioned before, Vedanta in Hinduism. The term Vedanta is the path of wisdom, the path of knowledge, the path of learning about the true nature of things. The bhakti yogi doesn't care about the true nature of things, you see? The pure devotional person could care less. I don't want to know about all these details. I just want to love God. That's it. I want to feel. That's it. The path of wisdom guy or gal? Oh, tell me. I want to know. I want all the details. How is it working? I want to figure it out. That's like the extreme, right? You know, these two extremes. But of course, you can get very stuck in your head. It can be very ungrounding. That's the con of the path of wisdom. Therefore, the Buddha focused on grounding your wisdom. That's the point. You have to go through the body. You have to go through your sensations. The essence of mindfulness. What are you feeling? What do you feel right now? Do you feel the stress in your body? Where is the tension? Start there. That's how you then cultivate wisdom, is what do you do with it? How can, from there, you get to God? Right? That's the question. How do you get to God from there? Focusing on your sensations. Okay? The path of wisdom, the path of the heart is feeling a lot too, right? There's a lot of sensations. You get into a state of ecstasy, it's all sensation, right? It feels good. And that's kind of what bhakti-based traditions are focused on, creating ecstatic experiences. Ideally, through meditation, but also externally, through various means. It's what it's all been about throughout the world. Creating the feeling of God within you, around you. The feeling of love. Well, the path of wisdom also starts with feeling, but in a different way. It takes feeling and removes all the attachment to feeling. The path of wisdom, the path of devotion, you're getting attached to feeling. Okay? The point is to attach to love. You use desire as a vehicle to help it make sense. You're using the desire of union with the divine as your motivation and pathway to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yes, I'm not taking that in. And, like, don't they sort of both potentially meet, like, in parts? Because
Of course, yes.
Because in the love, then the trap is, I'm so attached to love that now I'm not loving.
Right, the trap.
So then being back to union, that it's
Right.
like a love without conditions,
Right.
which is sort of like the detachment. Right, like this.
Right. So what most people don't know is in the Mahabharata, Krishna has two more discourses, two more Gitas, okay, that occur after the most famous one before the war. Second one occurs again with Arjuna. He comes to him and goes, you know what? You told me a lot that day. I've forgotten most of it. Can you say it again? And Krishna's like, no. I'm not going to say it all again. But I'm going to focus on some highlights. Okay? But I'm going to change my focus a little bit and focus on the fact that no matter which path you take, it gets to the same place. And you need both. Wisdom is just as important. And I'm going to focus more on Vedanta and understanding the nature of things as a way to balance out that. And the third time, one of his students, devotees, comes to him soon before Krishna leaves his body and goes and asks him similar things. Well, I wasn't there when you talked to Arjuna. Can you tell me the same stuff? And Krishna again, no, but I need you to focus on some of the highlights of devotion. So yes, the point is, those are two starting grounds, and what I am trying to promote is what you said. There's the path of the heart, the path of wisdom. We need both, is the thing. We tend to focus on either or, for whatever reasons. And for some people, either or is a starting place. Kind of depending on how you're made, is the thing in your karma. You'll find yourself gravitating to either or, is the thing. But to balance, you need both. Eventually, if you start here, you got to balance with this eventually. If you start here, you got to balance with this eventually too. And they both meet, and they get you to the same place. They both focus on sensation and feeling in different ways. One begins with attachment as a tool, and attachment is supposed to then transform into unconditional, detached, pure devotion. Here you start with attachment as a problem and realize how problematic it is. Okay? And you let go of your attachment. Once it's gone, then you are free and clear to experience the devotion and love that's already there. And therefore, the Buddha, for those of you who are into Buddhist traditions, that's why he would incorporate teachings of metta, loving kindness, compassion. Right? That's a central principle in most Buddhist traditions. A meditation, literally, right? He spoke about the 4 Brahma Viharis, the 4 exalted states of being for a human to focus on. 2 have to do with devotion. 1 being karuna, what my center is named after, having compassion for those who suffer. Right? That's love, right? That's charity, that's service, that's what, people are in church should be striving to. Karuna, having compassion for those who suffer. Metta, wanting goodwill for others, wanting the best for others. And then the third being bliss, feeling joyful and blissful, which is a higher ultimate byproduct of bhakti and devotion. This path of bhakti gets you to bliss. The bliss of God is the point. You see? Being one with God. You feel that. And then you transcend it. But you need wisdom to transcend it. That's the rub here. Wisdom gets you also to a state of bliss. Because once you work through your stuff, once you heal your trauma, awaken your vitality, connect to Kundalini, awaken the channels, you feel great. Now, these things, as I talked about in the last talk, the roadmap, are also happening in the path of devotion. All these things I mentioned, I just mentioned. But it's a different way to get them going. But they happen in both. The Kundalini awakens in both. Vitality awakens in both. Healing happens in both. Heart opening happens in both. Happens here first. Usually heart opening happens here second. The mind opens here usually second. The mind opens here usually first. That's the difference. But it gets to the same place then. Because you've been working on wisdom and detachment, Once you get to the bliss stage, it's easy to work through that. You're an expert. It doesn't like bog you down. You're like, this is bliss? Great, this will pass. What's next? But it's harder, as they say. It's more work. Devotion doesn't always seem like work, right? But the path of wisdom is work.
Simone, it seems like there's more personal responsibility in the wisdom path, in terms of if the devotional path is outsourcing, let's call it salvation, outsourcing salvation onto the object, to Jesus, for example. The way out is Jesus, or the way to salvation is Jesus, but in the wisdom path, the way out is in. And because it seems, in my experience, that the path of devotion gets very mixed up with religion. That's been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that the arrival at the more Buddhist ideals has been more, it's on me to go in
Right.
and deal with everything we've been talking about.
Most religion as we know it is based on devotion, is the thing. Then you have the outlier, Buddhism, which they fall under, it's put under religion, but Buddhists say we're not a religion. That's why. Because it's not based on devotion.
Because he said, this worked for me, you should try it.
Right, exactly. It's an internal salvation, which was already a very strong string in the Vedic tradition. Internal salvation was the basis, with external salvation being an aid for that, not as the goal or the only thing, which is what religion has become because it's easier at first. Therefore, religion adopts it across the board generally in our age.
And that's why it feels like there's more personal responsibility in the wisdom tradition. That's the way it feels to me.
In authentic traditions, there are safeguards for that, is the thing, which religions kind of push aside as their practice now. You see, so in authentic devotion-based religions, you had guides, personal relationship guides, and that's where the idea of the guru comes in, is the point. So you had either like a family or a group or a personal guru who held you accountable. So you would be directed with external salvation, say, on some external connection to God, but you had constant reminder that the salvation is really internal. I think that reminder is gone now, as we have it, especially in the Western religions. We don't get that reminder. It's only about external salvation, right? Especially in terms of how the theology plays out, right? You are doing this to get to heaven, which is out there, to be with something else. Basically, right? So of course, yeah, you're always striving to get there.
But Christ said the kingdom of heaven is within.
Right.
See, so that's
Exactly.
contradictory. Yeah.
But how many Christians focus on that?
It's the mystical Christianity that was
Yes.
corrupted.
Lost
Yeah.
and hidden away is the thing. And you see that in the historical timeline of the formation of Christianity too, how that happened, right? And when you see that, you're like, that kind of sucks. From like how Paul then codified certain things, and then Constantine comes around and codifies even more things in the Roman Empire, and then how the Roman Catholic Church codified even more things. At least the Catholics have saints, right? These guides to like revere and look up to, and see as people to aspire to, and they have miracles, magical things, magical moments, right? Now, the Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, still has meditation, which the Catholics got rid of. And Protestants got rid of all of that. Stripped it all gone. Which then makes it really hard and easy to derail and lose sight of kind of, in my opinion, how things were supposed to be. More of a mystical way of doing things. There's not much mysticism in most Protestant ways of doing things. And even if there is, it kind of gets like overlaid. Oh, that's the Holy Spirit. It's doing its thing. Or they look funny at like the Quakers and the Shakers who are actually awakening energy in their body, getting in these ecstatic states. They're like, oh, they're weird. That's what they're doing, right? Or the Pentecostals speaking in tongues. They're doing some, when it's authentic, channeling some cool energy and awakening some energy in their body, which is doing some stuff. And some of them may be possessed, probably most of the time, but it's still acknowledging a side of reality that then gets lost in other places. That there is a magical side that you can tap into, which was what the ancient world was steeped in. There was no separation between the other side and our side. That's the thing. So Krishna, Buddha, Christ is why I focused on them. Was that helpful in kind of connecting those three figures together? And kind of what they brought and how they're going about the same business in different ways.
In like Rosicrucianism or anthroposophy, they say there's different ascended masters for different times because there's different energy in each period, and then we'll receive the information from that ascended master the way that we are set up with during that time.
Yeah.
And that's why there's different ones who come at different times.
Right.
But then what we do is we kind of pit them against each other and create religious disagreement, but really they're all saying the same thing.
Humans love to make things bigger than what they are, is what we end up doing, for better or worse, right? So these great teachers in the past and in the present, we start deifying them. If your religion allows it, you start deifying them, right? Or vilifying them, and they start taking on these other, personas, right? But, for those of you who don't know, the anthroposophy in the Rosicrucians are people, is anyone not familiar with those terms? So they fall under the category of what you could simply say mystery traditions, mystery schools, which is more akin to mystical ways of looking at things, which is more akin to kind of what we're talking about today.
But Rudolf
Right.
Steiner always talks about the Vedas.
He does.
Yeah.
Steiner was the founder, the formulator of what he called anthroposophy, which was a reiteration of theosophy, which was started by Madame Blavatsky, right, in the mid 1800s. And so Steiner focused more on Christ, is what he did, is what the big difference is. So in theosophy brought the idea of these grand ascended teachers to the West in a big way. So she brought forth a lot of very hardcore books about things, mystical ideas and history, which were derived from the East, but she shifted it into a Western language in a way for Europeans and Americans to understand a lot of Eastern stuff. and she overlaid it with a lot of Western mystery traditions as well. Hermeticism, Rosicrucians, these older mystery schools that overlaid with Eastern stuff, and that became Theosophy, which had a massive influence in the West, more than a lot of people realize. Emerson and Thoreau were Theosophists, right? A lot of people that we don't really know actually were part of this tradition. And so they really spread these mystical, esoteric ideas to the West, kind of as a counter to Christianity in most places. So in the theosophical mindset, there were these ascended masters throughout history. And they kind of like took everyone from everywhere, is the idea. They had a core group. Blavatsky got her teachings from these 3 ascended masters specifically. And then other people that were part of the organization kind of went off on their own ways, and Alice Bailey, Rudolf Steiner did kind of their own thing with it, right? And Steiner specifically focused on Christ. He gave preeminence to Christ, is the thing. That was his thing. He didn't think they were equal. He thought Christ held a higher position, and that's a whole different rabbit hole, is the thing. And he goes into why, and it's a whole thing. Waldorf schools are based on Steiner. Steiner he was a genius. He was like a polymath, a massive influence on so many things, right? So, and he spoke a lot, wrote a lot. But these mystery traditions, the Rosicrucians, are it's like a parallel offshoot with the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, that are taking ancient mystical elements and running with them. And so the Rosicrucians have a connection to Egypt as well, ancient Egyptian mystery school. So as the Christian church was moving through history, the ancient traditions had to go into hiding basically in the West, and they became the mystery schools is what really happened. They kind of went underground, and they became the mystery schools in different parts of the world. Especially in the West. And so then they got, organized into these terms that we have now, the Rosicrucians, the Theosophists, leading into the Freemasons. It's a whole different rabbit hole, right? But there's enough online about that stuff. But that's kind of where it comes from when you're mentioning that. But the central theme is, though, these teachers have been around. These very wise, almost superhuman beings that all of us can aspire to, that are God-like with a lower G. It's a very big distinction. God-like, who are on the road to the avatar, but not there, or maybe there. It gets blurry and fuzzy, right? But there's a difference between God-like versus being God. Big G-O-D. The only way you can conceive of being a big G-O-D is if you embrace the idea that we're all parts of God. The ancient worldview, that the truly what's called panentheistic view. God is here, transcendent and immanent, which was the basic view of ancient India and, in my opinion, the ancient world. So these mystery schools had to kind of go into hiding and form their own, structures that then have come forth now that we know of in the modern age. That Theosophy really brought to the surface. And so every tradition's kind of held Hermeticism, that the ancient Egyptians and Greeks were really focused on. All of modern day astrology, tarot, divination is attributed to Hermes. Who was Hermes? Thoth. Who was Thoth? These dudes that were these godlike dudes with these stories doing cool stuff that we have. But the ancient Indians were like, oh yeah, there's tons of them. They've been around forever. There's a whole bunch. They keep coming and going. Most of them never die either, just so you know. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but where you started in asking about the movie Avatar, first when you said that, when you were asking about Avatar itself, I was thinking of, sorry, but it's like the cartoon Avatar, which actually is more
Yes.
accurate to what you're talking about as well.
Sorry, I should have made the distinction. Yeah,
Yeah.
not that.
Yeah.
That's different, yeah.
But I mean, through this talk, that feels more in line with what you're talking about, these kind of different avatars that come up at different periods
And so
in that world.
that story movie, Avatar about the kid,
Mm-hmm.
okay, with the 5 elements, he's playing more the role of the pivotal figure Avatar, of how they change and are key to events in history, is the thing. And so the traditional idea of the Avatar is they come when they're needed the most in the world. They come to make something happen, to bring a change, to help awaken people. Is the
And
idea.
the elements are out of balance
Right,
for some reason.
in the story they were,
Yeah.
and so he helped.
Yeah.
And so that's the idea of the Avatar. I encourage you, like, most people from the Eastern perspective know of Avatar from the perspective of Vishnu. So Krishna is considered an avatar of Vishnu, is the idea. So Vishnu was a original god being contemporary with Shiva in the Hindu mythology. So again, like I said before, in modern day Hinduism, Vishnu would be considered God to a certain class of Hindus, where Shiva would be considered God, and then the mother goddess would be considered God. And it goes on and on like that in Hinduism. But the point is, Vishnu himself has his own stories. Vishnu and Shiva were actually, in their origin stories, which are there too in Hinduism, where they came from. Now, it gets blurry with Vishnu and Shiva, because they don't really get into where they came from. It kind of gets lost. But they were cousins and brothers. It's hard to tell which one. In the original Vedas, they talk about the original devas, the original gods who were interacting with humans, very similar to the other mythologies. So there's always a chief god. In Hindu system, it was Indra, right? Contemporary with Zeus, Odin, Jupiter. And so there are these other, it's a family. And they mention Shiva as Rudra and Vishnu as part of that family. But they have minor roles in the original Rig Veda, the first book of the Vedas, where it's basically they talk about a lot of the escapades of these gods. Indra is focused on primarily. And they barely mention Shiva and Vishnu, which is very interesting. But what we have now is Indra is gone from modern day Hinduism. It's all about Shiva and Vishnu, which is very interesting, and I have specific theories about that. But then Vishnu takes on the role of having multiple avatars, where he's described in the Vishnu sect of Hinduism, where Vishnu is God. God comes down 10 times to earth. God being Vishnu, in a sense. And so Vishnu has 10 forms. He comes to earth as. Mind you, Shiva has multiple avatars too in the Shiva lineages. But most of Hinduism, they kind of ignore Shiva's lineages. Shiva's avatars, right? So Krishna is one of Vishnu's avatars. And what's interesting is his previous avatars, the first one is a fish. That he comes down as a fish that increases in size to warn the Hindu version of Noah that a flood is coming. Not the first flood, just so you know, in Hinduism they say it's not the first flood. It's one of many that's happened before. Okay? Which is very interesting. But a flood is happening He comes as a fish that can talk in the mythology, right? The second avatar is, he is a giant turtle being holding the earth up. Very interesting, and you can start to see, Native Americans talk about the turtle as well.
And the indigenous Hindu Queen talk about the two great floods, and Ishkin is one of the fish that brings the
Right.
medicine. So
These non-human forms bringing wisdom to us. And then he comes as a half boar, half human. Vishnu does. I don't know what that means. But then he comes as a half lion, half human. Very interesting. And the half lion, half human is very common in other cultures too, in terms of different types of beings and gods.
Would that be connected to like the age of Leo?
Some people try to.
Or, like-
I think it predates all that. My personal opinion is, the age of Leo is, you got to remember, that's a Western concept. These terms we give, Leo, Sagittarius, those are Greek Western.
Yeah.
Hindu Vedic has completely different iconography and symbolism for those ages. Is what it's the thing to keep in mind.
It's not the same 12 animals?
No,
There's different.
no.
The
It
tropics.
can be completely different based on the different culture. Chinese are completely different. Right? It just,
Several forms of astrology.
yeah.
I have a Vedic astrologer and he said I'm actually a Cancer.
Well, they use
not a
the
Leo.
Western overlay. That's what they end up doing now.
Okay.
What I'm saying is in the original astrology works
Yeah.
in ancient India, they give them deity names. The original zodiac in Jyotish, Vedic astrology, the 12 zodiacs are different, different gods and goddesses.
Okay. Okay. They must correspond to the
Yes,
Western
that,
animals.
in terms of like their attributes
Yeah.
and what they, yes.
Okay.
But in terms of the symbolism, it's kind of an interesting thing we kind of forget. Because most of our astrology is based from Greek, Babylonian, right? As an aside. So yeah, the stuff they mentioned in terms of these avatars and what they're doing, because these Vishnu comes as a half lion, half human to defeat a very dark lord, a very powerful demon on earth, who's rampaging the heavens and the hells and earth and taking over everything. So he comes to defeat him. That's the story. What is going on there, right, is the question. And so in some of the other avatars, that's kind of what he's doing. He's coming to save humanity from the dark forces. And then he comes as, in the Vishnu tradition, Ram, from the story Ramayana in India, and then there's Krishna. And then what the Hindus did, the Vishnu followers, they brought in Buddha, and they made Buddha an avatar, which, in my opinion, was a religious insertion of including the Buddha for religious reasons to kind of absorb, because Hinduism just absorbs, it just takes in, that's why Buddhism didn't survive in India, in essence. It just got absorbed, nothing really Christianity just gets absorbed, right? You've got Catholics in India, there are Catholics in India who, just mix Hinduism and Catholicism.
Do they-
Brazil Catholics.
Brazil as well,
too, with the
right,
African
same thing happens.
traditions and
Yeah.
everything, yeah.
So if we're embracing or allowing for this wider universal spirituality path, it seems like that's what we're doing, or at least that's what I'm doing. How do we avoid what I would see as the pitfalls of widening the lens and not being narrowly devoted to a particular religion or avatar? Because it seems to me as I begin to say, I like that, I like that, I like that, the opportunities for spiritual bypass, just kind of doing what I want. I don't have a guru. You and I have talked about this before. You know, what is the requirement of an inner compass to like navigate an even wider spirituality? It's daunting.
Yeah, that's
As
the ultimate
as I
question,
get older,
yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay. And I think I asked this the very first time.
Yeah,
Similar question.
that's the ultimate question, and that's kind of what my main intention is with all of this, right? Is like last time, have a roadmap. You've got to understand the roadmap, where you're going, and how to, and what happens if you stay on the road, right? And then with that roadmap, how to integrate the heart and the mind, and understanding where you're starting, what you're doing, and how do you balance that. So it's like you've got to understand the path of devotion really well, its own pitfalls and benefits. You've got to understand the path of wisdom as well, its own pitfalls and benefits, right? So it's hard to know. That's how I'm trying to put it all together, right, is the thing. And so it's hard, and so to put it together though becomes crucial, because all the great ancient systems of the world did that. They put it together. And if you don't have access to that, which we don't, sitting here, we've got to put it together ourselves. But to do that, it becomes very difficult because it's so much.
Yeah, because we keep bringing in other things
You just keep,
as
yeah,
the conversation goes on. Yeah.
more and more. And so, but all of that isn't really important. Because the thing is, for the path of wisdom, you've got to learn how to meditate. Even for the path of devotion, that's the crucial element. You've got to know how to properly meditate. And then for the path of wisdom specifically, you have to know how to properly apply mindfulness. Buddha's teachings. That's key on this end. So on this end, meditation, of course, is also, like I said, the foundation, but then you've got to properly apply devotion as a practice and integrate it. Learn how to integrate it with the path of wisdom. So it doesn't have to be simultaneous. It can be either or, but eventually you have to layer in ways that feel right for you. You know, kind of what you're used to, what you gravitate to. Some person wants to focus on Christ because of how they're raised, where they come from, what they're familiar with. It's familiarity too, right? Not many people are going to focus on Kali. That's different.
Yeah. So anchored devotion is what I'm hearing. you say.
Anchored devotion.
Yeah. And always on the cushion, always meditating.
Yes, right. And that was the main gist of Krishna is devotion is key, but you have to anchor it with concentration. You have to focus on devotion. Your devotion has to be focused. Not just a amorphous feeling you chase or something you do. And that's the key. It's not what you do. Is the downfall of devotion is it becomes about doing. Ritual, activities, doing things, where the path of wisdom doesn't so much have the doing in terms of external doing. It's more internal, right? But the devotion path has more of external doings, rituals and things we do to bring God into our life, to bring presence, to bring reminders, things like that.
Now, the trap is the focus on devotion can also become a doing.
Yes.
So then how to allow
Right.
the being and the allowing of the experiencing and being in it, so you're it, but it's also you.
Right. Right. And again, the path of devotion also needs mindfulness and meditation. Because the path of wisdom uses mindfulness exclusively to work through. But the path of devotion needs mindfulness as a safeguard. You're not directly really working through stuff with mindfulness, but you need it there in the beginning to make sure you stay on the right track, like you're saying. Because if you don't have that, you get lost. And what that means is you get caught up in what you're feeling. And you make that the end goal. That's the thing. It's not supposed to be the end goal. Feeling bliss is not the end goal. Even though many would say that is, for example.
Because if you're feeling the bliss and you're aware you're feeling the bliss, then you're not in union. Because in union there's no separation, there's just isness.
Right. That's the deepest part of it, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And it
But-
sounds like the perfect balance between the masculine and the feminine is the divine union. These are
Right.
those two paths. One feels a bit more in the feminine, and the other one more in the masculine. If that's, you know, that you're doing. I could just
Exactly.
see that perfect union.
In the pre-Buddhist traditions in India, this side was more connected to Shiva.
Mm.
Right? Shiva teaching the ways to meditate, breath work, do yoga, to do the internal practices to clear the body and mind,
Yeah.
is what's attributed to Shiva. And in those Shiva lineages, they still are in India, you see. And in the Tantric Buddhist practices, they mixed them. They really mixed the Shiva and the Buddhist practices and got rid of Shiva. Kind of, in a sense. And replaced them with the Buddha. They replaced Shiva with Buddha in Tibetan Buddhism, and, you know, kept the Tantric Hindu systems more or less, is what ended up happening, right? And so, but in the Shiva-based Tantric Buddhist Hindu practices, Shiva is here, and the divine feminine is explicitly focused on here. And there's a form of Shiva Parvati, Parvati being the consort of Shiva, the female half of Shiva, as both. There's a form of Shiva Parvati where one half is Shiva, one half is Parvati, as one being. And that's the ultimate embodiment to aspire to. That balance of male and female.
And you can see that in the Hindu representation of the body, where we have different channels, right? And the left side is feminine, the right is masculine, and then in our material body, we balance that with that breath, right?
One way of doing it,
Mm-hmm.
to balance it, is using the breath, and those practices is the thing. And to keep in context, real quickly, in the Bhagavad Gita, back to Krishna, he outlined those two paths. And then he added, as extra credit, two more things to keep in mind, which is, as another layer on each side to practice now, karma yoga, as a practical way to actualize devotion, karma yoga, which is doing things in every moment for the sake of doing it, without being attached to the fruit of the actions, is how we describe it. Do good just to be good. It's karma yoga, you see? Just to help for the sake of helping. Which is what, you know, in religions, charity is based on, charity and service and seva, right? That's the point. That's why they're doing it. Same idea. But it is a way to embody and actualize bhakti yoga, devotion, for others. And he said, Raja Yoga. For the wisdom people, Raja Yoga Raja means royal path. It's not better than the other, but Raja Yoga is the 8 stages of cultivating the self. Ashtanga Yoga, which is the 8 limbs of yoga that Westerners are most familiar with, which is what pranayama breathwork is part of. You see? But Raja Yoga is the 8 limbs with a heavy emphasis on the meditation part. And so he kind of added those as extra credit. If you really want to practice these 2 ways, here's what you do for both of those. And the truly authentic schools and lineages throughout the world do both. They have practices to heal your body, clear your mind, heal your trauma, awaken your vitality and kundalini. And there are practices to be a better person and serve. Right? If you really kind of scrutinize different traditions and you start to see, okay, if they're doing both, okay, they're kind of on the right track. Even like, Catholic monks and nuns, they're doing service all day long, but yet they're sitting in contemplation or meditation as well. Which then, not to, lose track of the idea that, the Buddha specifically said, and he showed us, if you get still in the path of wisdom, if you get still, if you can truly get your body and mind still enough, and this is what I talked about last time, everything aligns and works out and awakens. You don't have to try. And that's what hardcore Buddhists are doing, the Theravada Buddhists. And they're not doing any Kundalini yoga, they're not doing any breath work or yoga or anything like that. You're just sitting, like the Zen Buddhists, they're sitting all day long, just meditating on the breath. And they're getting so still, eventually, and there's stages to that, right? They're getting so still, Kundalini automatically awakens. Because like I said last time, remember, Kundalini awakens when the breath gets still. So there's so many ways to get to it. And when Kundalini awakens, that's the bliss body.
Well, what is the benefit of a Kundalini awakening?
It's what's going to happen, whether you like it or not. So there are many benefits, but it's a stage that is going to happen. The Kundalini is your divine energy. It's an actualization of, how Catholics would put it, it's your Holy Spirit in your body.
Yeah.
So it's the actualization of the higher self, the divine, that you feel as an energetic phenomena. So it transforms you. It's the element of fire. It transforms your whole physical being through the energy centers, through the channels. It's the culmination. It's like the high, once Kundalini awakens and it does its thing, which is transformation, only then can you allegedly reach full human potential in your physical body.
But in that case, it has to go through the entire body, through the crown, is that correct?
It doesn't go through the crown, no. That's a way of looking at it. It transforms you.
Yeah.
So it circulates.
Yeah.
It circulates. So once it rises to the top, then it goes down again and comes up again.
To the interior of your skull, is that correct? Or does it go out to the outer areas?
You can do what you want with it.
I don't know.
No, what I'm saying is
I've had
different.
I've had it, but it didn't go all the way through. I didn't know what it was.
There are no rules with how it's going to happen and what happens to you.
Will
It's
it
personal.
happen again?
Oh yeah. It will. But it's happening more than people realize, and you don't label it as that.
For instance?
You feel happy.
Oh, all the time?
It's
Yeah.
It's a psychophysiological
Yeah.
process.
It's the bliss. I'm in bliss.
Depending on where you experience it in your different layers of your being is how you'll notice it. So if the Kundalini is working through, say, your mental body,
Yeah.
okay, then you may have a mental phenomenon of, say, like joy.
Yeah.
If it's working through your energy astral body, you see, you may have a sudden experience of this wave of bliss move through you. If it's going through your physical body, you may feel sudden movement.
Yeah, I've done that.
So it just depends. But this only happens once you've cleared the debris and junk that's in the way of the Kundalini.
But,
So it may be painful.
yeah.
That's
but
still Kundalini too.
I'm still clearing.
You're still clearing. We're all going to be clearing
From
for a
now on.
long time.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah. Kundalini isn't a moment. It's a process.
Process, I
It's a
see
process.
that, yeah.
It's a
I see
process.
that.
There is pre-Kundalini.
Explain that.
Well, that's going to be a different talk.
Okay.
Yeah. There's pre-Kundalini. There's classical awakening that can be different or similar to what people are used to. Then there's initial transformation, and then there's serious transformation. And then there's culmination. So in the esoteric works, they talk about if you do nothing else, if you're a full-time meditator, and you do nothing else all day long but meditate to awaken Kundalini, okay? At least 12 hours a day. It takes 12 years to go through this entire process. They mentioned the 12-year mark.
Where does the 12-year mark come in?
From actual pre-awakening to full culmination of Kundalini. Guess how, guess,
Job head.
And where can I sign up?
I have heard.
Salvation.
I have heard if somebody
well,
asked you.
Scott, what it pays is like infinite abundance.
Yeah, but I also heard that if somebody gave you an option, whether you take $1 million of Kundalini awakening, you'd be better off with the $1 million. From my experience.
If you get here,
If you're looking
if
at
you
it
get
from
here,
the perspective
I didn't know.
you can
it was-
attract $1 trillion at will,
Yeah, I know.
is the thing.
But I didn't know
Well,
what
you
it
have value
was.
for the
I
$1 trillion
had no
though.
idea. I thought I was dying.
So guess how many years are the lost years of Christ? 18 to 30,
18, right?
12 years.
12
Yeah.
to 30. Yeah.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
In India?
I'm reading a book about that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may share a little bit of what I've learned. So I'm seeing actually a lot of lineup between Kundalini awakening and a lot of the text in the Bible. For instance, the flood.
Yeah.
I do believe there were flood events, but I think specifically, the flood is talking about how this energy comes in and floods you at first, because when that door of consciousness gets blown open, and I think some people would explain it as a top-down Kundalini awakening, because you're trying to, or something has happened that has made this energy come in before you've actually started from the bottom, so to speak, from Jacob's ladder. You were supposed to climb from the bottom up, not from the top down. So when you get flooded with all this energy, it kind of just blows the door of your consciousness wide open, when really it's supposed to be more like a percolating, like a coffee drip, where you're just taking it in, you're sifting through the junk, like, how they talk about sifting gold, or, sifting through the dirt and whatnot, the gold, refining the gold, through how the Bible uses a lot of those, refining gold processes. And so when it talks about how God would not, use a flood again to destroy the world is actually symbolic of man, because if you look at the term olam, it can mean world, but it's actually symbolic of man, because we're each our own world. And so when it talks about the second time, it won't be a flood, it will be fire, it's talking about that holy fire. It's all a psychophysiological process. Well, I mean, it's more than that, but still.
Right. You can't discard the Bible, even though people want to, is the thing, because there's a lot in the New Testament and the Old Testament that's layered in there that is very mystical and esoteric. But you have to learn how to read it right, in my opinion, is the thing. And that's kind of where people get bogged down. But yeah, there's so much, if you don't throw away the Bible, that you can get out of it, depending on how you look at it. Thank you.
That's good.
So to close, my goal is to really outline how to integrate these ways and this system, and because it's hardwired in us, is the thing. And once you start doing the work, or you start getting in alignment, things start to happen and shift, and they have already for a lot of you, and things start to accelerate, or they, other things start to, shift and awaken and heal. But there's a lot of moving parts to it and a lot of different elements that are important to keep sight of. The heart, the mind, the energy, what you're doing, healing, that's a lot, right? The philosophy of it. There's so much to like dive into that's part of this way of looking at spirituality. And the beauty of it is, though, it's always been there. And it still is. And the thing is, you don't have to do it all. You just start somewhere and you work on it, and other things start to fall into place, because if it's hardwired in our DNA, it starts to fall into place, like I'm saying. The Kundalini will awaken in so many different ways, no matter what you're doing, in any path. But then if you know that it's awakening, it's really helpful. And then you can kind of manage and work with it, right? Just like healing. Healing falls under the pre-Kundalini category. Any healing work you're doing, you've got to work on the trauma. Trauma is the number one blockage we hold in our being that creates the resistance and the forgetting and the amnesia. It's the trauma, right? And then the toxins, the physical and emotional toxins that we hold, that we've acquired just living here. It's so hard being on earth and doing this, right? And then with what we're talking about, we feel like we're outcasts. Most people around us are just focused on so many other things, because this whole realm is meant to get you attached. That doesn't help. It's the whole problem, right? Everything is so alluring. The senses, there's so much beauty and wonder in the world, and there's so much darkness too that pulls you constantly back and forth. Like I say, we're literally living in a heaven and hell simultaneously. And we tap into both realms all the time in different ways. Your shadow stays stuck in hellish realms, and your higher self lives in the heavenly realms, and you're just constantly going back and forth in your thoughts and your actions and what you're doing, what you're eating, what you're saying. And that's why I talked about last time in the roadmap, your ethics and morality and your actions are the first main starting points. That's where you start, and that's the proof of the work. And that's the thing. If you've done the work, if your Kundalini is really awakened, and you've done the work, and you've really healed, and you've connected to sources within you, and you have higher guidance, and all these wonderful things, it should show. You should see it. You should feel it. You should feel more vitality. If you're not, there are more blockages to clear. If you still can't be honest to yourself and others, there's still more work to be done inside. If you still are afraid of dying, there's some reframing that can be done with how you see the journey of your soul. If you can't focus, there's a lot more meditating to be done. A lot more concentration practices. If you can't handle discomfort at all, you've got to do a lot more mindfulness. And that's kind of what ends up being, in my opinion, oftentimes the first starting point. A code of ethics and mindfulness. If you just start there, it's going to take you a long way. And a lot of traditions just only do that, a code of ethics and mindfulness. And they can go all the way. That's what a lot of hardcore Buddhist Theravada and Zen practitioners are doing. They have a code of ethics, and they're just meditating.
It's like I can tell if I meditated or not on a certain day by the way I'm sitting in traffic. And what you're saying, it's like, for me, like the meditation has to come first, and then my ethics fall into place because I meditated. Like, I'm not gonna like secretly curse out that person who just cut me off.
Mm-hmm.
If I meditated that morning,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be like, oh, and I I might even laugh.
Right.
Like that, then I know I'm.
Exactly.
Then I know I did a good job.
You start to see that your ethics, your actions are based on how you're reacting to things, which is
Yeah.
mindfulness.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what starts to happen. But until you're there, all the time, you need a code of conduct
It's like
to keep you on track.
It wavers because
Yeah.
sometimes I don't meditate or like I'm, yeah, and I wish I could just be always in that place
Exactly.
of composure.
Yeah, but we can't yet.
So here's a question that I've been thinking about for the last 3 times. How do you meditate while you're in chronic pain?
Oh, that's a wonderful topic for another day. You have to train. It's a whole mindfulness training process. And that's what I'll kind of be offering in, groups and stuff like that. A whole program of meditation and mindfulness. It's going to be all part of this, right? So it's kind of the foundational piece too. And it's once you know how, there are certain elements to know what to do, especially when you're meditating, how to direct attention, how to deal with awareness, how to work with that and apply this neutral state. It's kind of what you want. It's called equanimity, right? That's the mindfulness we're talking about. So those are all the elements you have to know about and then use in a meditative state, ideally, because that's when you can practice it, and you use it on yourself, on your own thoughts and sensations. You follow? So it's really changing. What you're really asking is changing your relationship to your pain.
Yeah.
Means changing your relationship to the sensation of pain, the sensations in general, what you feel, and your tendency to push them away, called reacting with aversion.
You get above
That's a
the
training.
pain. You get above the pain. Out, you look down on the.
It feels that way, yes.
Yes, but I've
Right.
gotten above it, watching,
Right.
but if it gets too bad, I can't get in that state.
Right. And then there are nuances to this. You don't want to stay above the pain because the pain is something there for a reason.
Broken leg.
Well, that's different. Yeah, if it's an
Yeah.
obvious broken leg, then while it's healing, there can be pain, and so
Yeah, severe, yeah.
the goal is to get to a stage where you don't feel the need to make the pain go away. Ideally, so broken leg is kind of different because that's a very physical thing that you have to work through, right? And then if you can not react to the pain, you can work through it better.
Can we do any pain, like back pain,
Oh,
disc
yeah.
pain, and
All
all
of it,
that stuff?
yeah. There are people here who've worked through their pains with mindfulness and meditation, and it transforms.
I can
Remember,
improve
pain-
it, but not have it go away. I can improve.
So just so you know, this is what I'm talking. The roadmap is, as you get better at this process, pain transforms. Because pain is nothing but locked energy. It's stuck
Yeah.
prana, it's stuck chi. You see?
Even if a broken bone or a disc or something is still stuck energy?
Well, it's stuck in a sense. I mean, there's damage to the tissue,
Yeah,
right? But that physical damage is what's causing that now blockage of chi
yeah.
in that area,
Yeah.
which you then feel in your pain receptors.
Yeah,
Is how it breaks down, right?
and you
So,
did change
that tissue has to heal.
Yeah,
That's what your body's going to do.
yeah.
You see, but while it's doing that, you can still manage the pain. But non-trauma based physical pain is kind of really more what I'm talking about. The emotional pain, the mental pain, discomfort, irritation, anger, all these things we don't want to feel.
Yeah.
All of those are energies that are there for a reason. So you work with it if you can in the beginning to, kind of separate yourself, change it, maybe fight it. That's all part of the process. Ultimately, you can get to a state where you're so neutral. Pain is there, and you let it be there.
I asked why.
You can ask why,
Why?
but even if you ask why, you let it be there.
It has
Okay,
to-
pain, you're there. Do your thing. If you can truly do that with 100% neutrality, that pain will then transform.
Transform to what? No pain?
No pain.
It's like it has to do with acceptance and resistance. When you resist something, you
Yeah.
create a little war.
Right.
And
Exactly.
when you accept it, it just
Exactly.
there's nothing
Yeah.
happens.
It's all about resistance and acceptance.
Yeah.
Because remember, the true nature of energy in our body is pleasure. It's actually bliss. You see, that's one of how they describe one of the qualities of all of divinity. Right? Satchitananda in Hinduism. Pure bliss consciousness is how they describe God, the manifest God.
Would that be considered kind of like a high?
At a basic human level, yeah.
I can get to that
Yeah.
high, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very temporary,
Yes.
basic version, right? But when pain and normal pleasure both transform, they transform into eternal bliss. When I say bliss, I don't mean just feeling good. It's something
just
else.
static.
So what I'm saying is, if you can, the pain and first you start with pain, because that's the hardest, it's what's keeping us back. If you can work with pain first, then you work with pleasure, your attachment to pleasure, right? You're working with your avoidance of pain. The avoidance is what you change. Then if you change your attachment to pleasure, you free up pain and pleasure now. You free them so they transform into their true nature, which is Kundalini, bliss. Do you see how it's connected now? That's why the healing is so important.
Yeah.
Pain, you've got to figure out how to manage your pain, stress, and tension. You have to manage your stress and tension and how it's making you feel. That's what creates most of the resistance. That then keeps you locked into a state of fighting it and figuring out a way to feel good. And you get desperate. So you start eating things to make you feel good. You start doing things to make you feel good. You start finding people to make you feel good. You start whatever. And that's what we're doing. All that's normal human behavior. And so that's what we call normal living. But all of this is about remembering, oh, it doesn't have to be like that. And spirituality is very practical. Like what we're talking about at the end right now, this is hardcore practical reality, right? How you handle your irritation and pain. Your boredom. That's actually a sensation, being bored. It's a feeling. How do you handle that? Do you try to stop it? You're reacting to it. What if you didn't? What if you stayed bored? You're bored? Okay, I'm bored. Let me breathe. I'm going to stay bored. If you can do that, all of a sudden, something shifts in you. You're not bored anymore. Or, examples. I mean, that's...
Have you gone through all of these yourself?
I'm working on stuff just like you. Look, we're all working on different stuff in different ways. That's why it's so individualized and personal, right? Now, there are stages. Once you work through stuff in certain areas, things happen. And you get to certain stages of more permanent states. Like when you work through certain levels of healing, you gather vitality. It awakens in you. And you become less tired in general. You feel good in general. You can eat less good quality foods and feel good. Stuff like that you start to see, right? Your sleep becomes sound and great. Those are basic levels of wellness, right? So those are examples of stages of basic healing in this early stage here that we're all working on. And then there are higher stages of higher vitality. Okay, so you've got all the energy you need all day long. You don't get tired anymore. Then what? There are other stages beyond that. What happens then? Ooh, then you start to feel like this. Your body starts to feel like a 10-year-old body.
Even if you're old?
Yes.
Is it frustrating to not know what to do with the energy? Then you have all this energy, and maybe you don't know what to do with
That's
it.
part of the process of.
So then you have a new problem.
You still need a game plan. That's part of the roadmap, right? You still need the game plan. So you have all this energy. That's what actually derails people, because the energy feels good, or they don't know what to do with it. So it can actually be a little irritating. Okay, so you do enough healing, especially down here. Getting very practical and real here. Down here, okay? You do some healing, and as a basic example, sexual energy is that for everyone. It's a spiritual energy that at the basic level shows up in the second chakra as sexual energy, okay? If you don't know what to do with it, it comes out, usually. You leak it, as it's called. You will express it somehow, especially from at a young age. You start to, and then it comes out somehow. You will reduce the pressure. Sexual energy is Kundalini energy, in the raw sense. That's what it is. Every human has it. It's going through it, right? When it starts to awaken at puberty, culturally we just learn how to discharge it all the time, some way or another, good ways, bad ways, whatever. If you can start to handle that better, and for certain genders it's harder than others, is the thing, but if you can start to handle it better, be more okay with the energy you feel, it starts to move into creative energy. It transforms into creativity, right? And we kind of understand that. We kind of get that. And you start then expressing this energy as creative energy from the third center. Or through more focused ways that you're then exerting your will and power in good ways. That's how it's now channeling through you. But what if you can't handle that either? Well, either stifle it, goes back down, or you start to direct it out in different ways. You misdirect it, or you start to hyper-exercising. It's a common thing. You get a lot of energy, you start to work out constantly. You're just discharging it because you can't handle it. That's all you're doing. What if you didn't? Which means you have to apply enough mindfulness to be okay with the discomfort of this newness of extra energy. So you have to get through that phase, you see? If you can, then you can access it at will and do what you want with it. And again, this is where proper ethics in the beginning comes into play, because then you can direct it in good ways or bad ways. Occult traditions start to focus on it in specific ways. Dark occult traditions start to focus on it in very specific ways to serve the self. You see? Spiritual traditions focus on it in ways to continue their spiritual practices. That's the only difference. And so Christ, all he was doing was trying to keep people on this track with his warning of the occult and dark practices. That's all he was doing. He was acknowledging they exist.
That energy can be used to go either way.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So the occult isn't bad. It's just a way to express energy. But in the East, they would describe, well, if you want to work with occult energy, it can either be white or black. Choose white. This is better karma. Choose white. Use your energy for good purposes. And that's what people are doing, right? But that's what happened. That's the next stage. How do you channel your heightened vitality? Usually, you can, healing work is that. Healers, they're channeling their energy to heal others. Awesome. Intuition, you're channeling your energy to gather intuition for whatever purpose. Great. Manifesting. All these new age stuff, that's what you're doing if you can. It's based on reality. You're channeling your energy to manifest, hopefully, things that are helpful. That's what prayer is, actually. Prayer is a channeling of your energy. People who get a result from praying are usually the people who are clearer and have healed or have more of a connection to the divine, or can focus their mind. 'Cause prayer is just a way of manifesting things, asking for something. You know, that's kind of what it is. So that's kind of what happens. Kind of answer your question. So you have to learn how to deal with the energy. We've gone way over time. So thanks for staying, guys. Hopefully see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a Kundalini thing happen May 4th because I'm doing a Siddha yoga
Mm-hmm.
course right now. So for 3 months.
The Siddha yoga through what? Through what tradition? Through the Siddha yoga tradition?
It's a guru.
Hmm.
I hate using that word because people.
So you have a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we're moving the energy up,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 months later, I had a dream that some energy shot through me twice in a row,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and I didn't remember this until the next day. I was looking at pictures of snakes. That's a whole other story. But I'm looking at pictures, like Cathar drawings of snakes, right?
Yeah.
And I remembered. I'm like, oh my God, was that a Kundalini awakening? So I checked with one of the acharyas, because we're being taught by below the guru, like a student of the guru who's achieved a certain level, right? And he's like, oh, it looks like Devi has blessed you. But I got really tired for weeks after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just coming out of the tiredness
Yeah.
now.
That's what happens.
And they were telling me, well, you must be leaking energy if you're so tired. He's a very kind of guru, you know, like the Indian kind of hardcore, like
Yeah.
no soft new agey.
Yeah.
You must be leaking energy then if you feel tired. Okay. All I could do is like when I didn't have to work was go to just lay in bed.
Yeah.
And I'm just coming out of that.
Yeah. See, Mike.
now. So
Yeah.
I feel like I have this energy, and I don't know if it was a complete awakening. I have no idea. Like, I don't
It's
know.
a awakening. That's how you should just think of it. You had an awakening. So now you have to learn how, your body has to figure out how to handle this energy. You've been learning how by getting tired. You've been going through a processing phase is what's happening. So your system is recalibrating. So you've needed to like stay low is kind of what happens. Right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm just laying real low.
Yeah. And
Like-
so things are
I don't want
recalibrating.
anything to happen.
That's what happens. There's a burst of energy and things have to recalibrate. It's best to lay low. And then once you go through that phase, if you can do it properly, then you've shifted into higher gear. You're going to have a different level of energy. And stuff like that will keep happening. That's the thing. It's a continuous cyclical progression
Yeah,
of
like if,
so many awakenings.
yeah.
Sometimes awakenings don't feel like awakenings, but they're awakenings. We call it different things in initiations, awakenings. They're all the same thing. People call release, healing, catharsis. All these things are the same idea. There's a shift happening in you. At some level, you just got, it's an infinite number of shifts are going to happen. Until you reach certain thresholds, or then you cross over, then it's like you've leveled up big time. Those are the stages I'm talking about. Once you, boom, it could be like tuk, 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 over years, tuk, 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 maybe tuk, or maybe tuk, 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 tuk. I'm here now. Once then it's hard to kind of go backwards, which is good, and you kind of keep going until it's kind of how it is generally.
Because you go backwards and then you go forwards and then you go back. But it gets more each time, right? Then you keep going
Yeah.
further.
Yeah. You can go backwards. It does happen. You know, if something is too intense and you can't handle it, and you shut it down. Darth Vader went backwards.
And it doesn't mean we're gonna, it doesn't mean that we're gonna, there's always gonna be a reincarnation and we bring that forward, what we've learned in that previous, and then go further in that next carnation.
It may not manifest in the next time, but it's
Oh,
still
it
there.
may not?
No,
If even though it manifests in this life, the
Oh, yeah.
next one it may not?
no.
Oh.
No.
What might not manifest?
Something you happen in this time may not manifest next time. It may manifest the time after. Or 10 times after.
You mean like something karmic, like karma?
Like if you gain something or learn something or acquired something, you know, any positive or negative karma isn't linear like that. It doesn't have to manifest next time, just like that.
I'm just amazed. Isn't it
You-
great?
like-
It's great.
Like, what can happen is like you get on a real healing trajectory, and say this lifetime you couldn't get to like this one really big final karmic issue you had, say with like fear of say how say you in a past life gained some energy and power and you abused it. Okay? So that created this knowing that you shouldn't do that again. So you have in this lifetime this fear of your own power. Okay? So you spend, that kind of forces you to, you know, spend a whole lifetime being born in like a household where you're subservient and say in a culture where you're a woman who's almost like a slave. Okay, so you're being forced to feel powerless,
Yeah, I've
right?
been there.
Basically,
This life.
what you did, how you made others feel last lifetime. Okay, so you go through that, and it was hell. Say it's hell. You ended up dying young. Say you got abused, and I don't know. Say you got killed when you were young. It was hell. Okay, you cleared a lot of karma. Obviously, from that life, from the lifetime before that. Now, next life. Next life, you want a vacation. Your higher self gives you a vacation. So you have a pretty good life. You're born into a wealthy culture, a wealthy family, they give you everything you need. You feel good. Not much happens, not much trauma. You enjoy your life.
I know people like that. Like I feel like they're on a vacation
Mhm.
life. Like just
Yeah.
looking at their
Vacation life. Life is good. Okay, next life after that. There was a little bit of abuse of power left in you. Tiny karmic seed that you didn't fully clear 2 lifetimes before. So now that sprouts. Even though you had a vacation life, now it sprouts. Do you see how it's not linear? It can jump around. Now that sprouts. And then you have to deal with that, however that shows up. I don't know, I'm just making this up, right? So you do that, you clear that, and you finally get to a place where you're very responsible with your own personal energy and power, and you don't manipulate others, you don't take what's not yours. Awesome. Great, you've really cleared the last vestiges of that karma, you've gained some good karma. Wonderful. Next lifetime, because you did so much clearing and healing, well, good for you. Your higher self is like, all right, Betty, from 20 lifetimes ago, there's something you didn't clear, okay? That's when, I don't know, you starved yourself for no good reason. So this lifetime, then you come in with you just want to eat everything.
Yeah, like me.
You know what I mean? So it gets weird and,
It just keeps.
non-linear, and it's,
If we get tired of this earth, can we go to another planet, to learn in that environment?
yeah, you can if you're able.
What
If
do
your
you
karma
mean
lets
I'm
you.
able? Oh, my karma.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
Look, most of reality is like the reality here, in the sense that you like to do things that you get used to,
Uh-huh,
right?
yeah,
You go to the same store probably over and over again.
yeah,
Why? Because you're used to it and you like it.
yeah.
Same thing happens with other lifetimes. You get used to this human body, you like it, so you keep coming back as a human. You see what I mean? You get used to certain family members, you keep circling around them. So therefore, usually you don't jump around too much. to other planets, other bodies, generally speaking, is the idea. But you can, is the thing, you know?
Can you learn all the lessons on this earth and then go to the
Yeah.
next?
Yeah, totally. And it gets a little more complicated too, because then it's like,
Because we have eternity.
we have a journey, and
Eternity.
what you think of as you isn't quite like that either.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you actually heal and clear a lot of what you think is you, another version of you
In a different.
in a different body,
Energy,
say that's
yeah.
part of your higher self too.
Yeah.
So the idea is your higher self, what if it has multiple yous?
Uh-huh.
Like different timelines.
Different timelines.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what if those start overlapping?
Yeah.
It gets so confusing then
Mhm.
to pull it apart.
Do you
Figure out
think,
what's really happening.
is our DNA like the junk DNA? The stuff they call junk? Is that starting to wake up?
You got all the good questions on you. You just all these rabbit holes.
I'm just woo woo girl. I'm just like I'm sorry.
Look,
yeah.
the junk DNA,
Yeah.
is this really cool idea that was really pushed by, like in the 80s and 90s, with a lot of the ascension stuff that came online, you know, especially with Greg Braden and Drenvilla, you know, Melchizedek, and some of them who really pushed this cool ascension model, right? Which is based on reality, there's stuff to it. But they really tried to make it physical, where there's junk DNA, that 12-strand DNA, and all these multiple strands of DNA. I don't keep track of it now. I think that it's even more complicated now, right? But some of you may keep track of it more than I do. But it's this idea that there's more to us that can awaken, is the idea. You know?
And then maybe we'll be
And the
aware
junk
of-
DNA is that, you know, it was interfered with in the past by other ETs and beings who dumbed us down, and there's truth to that too, right? So, yeah, we probably have, just like our brain, parts of our DNA just kind of dormant, is the thing. It's kind of what it's about, the junk DNA.
Yeah.
Their parts are just dormant and unused and sitting there. And we're realizing that some of that stuff can awaken and do stuff, but, you know, like if you ask this to a scientist, a biologist, they just kind of go, yeah, there's some stuff like junk DNA, but we don't really know what it's for.
Because they don't
But it's
understand it
sitting
on
there?
the energetic level.
Yeah,
They're just using the material.
right.
What
But
we
what I'm saying is
see.
most people who think they're awakening their junk DNA aren't. I guarantee you they're not. And because I think it's much more complicated than that, in that it is possible, because when you awaken your junk DNA, the idea is you get these powers, you start ascending and all these things like that, right? It's the whole idea. You're becoming more of a superhuman, which again is based on truth in ancient wisdom. There is stuff to that. But this is like a whole different talk, because it is so much more complicated and not what people think. Where it's as easy to, I mean, I remember in the late 90s, I was all into this stuff with the DNA stuff, and I got this pack of material on how to awaken your junk DNA by doing these complicated series of things, of specific breathing exercises and touching different acupuncture points and doing different mantras and visualizations. And if you do all of it, you'll awaken all of your DNA. Okay? Well, I did all of that. It's not what you think is the thing, which doesn't mean it's not true, but it's not as easy as people want to believe, right? The whole ascension, awakening latent abilities, that's not easy. It is real, and it can happen. And there are traditions that do focus on that. But it requires radical transformation, more than just believing it and just kind of focusing on it, and is what I'm trying to say, right? So to answer what you're saying.
Does the solar, the blast and all, and the full moons new moons and all of that, does that have an effect on our increasing our awakening?
Oh yeah, totally.
I thought so.
I mean, that's a rabbit hole too. you know.
But it is a
Yeah.
part of our awakening, is
Right.
that true?
And that goes along with the changing of the ages, the shift of the ages. You know, all these cultures talk about, you know,
But
things
it-
changing.
It raises the vibration
Raising the
of the
vibration.
earth and us also.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And I have my own 2 cents about that too, where I don't think it's like what people want to believe too.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm open. I'm
'Cause-
open.
Again, that gets into exterior salvation ideas.
And everything's within.
Yeah.
Everything's within.
And so it's almost like a trap where you are expecting the earth to ascend, and therefore you're going to ascend.
But what's the difference in surrender and, you know, this coming, I don't know how to bring it together in my mind, how it works.
Which part? The ascension of the planet and ascension of yourself?
Yeah, or just put it out of my mind and worry about this.
Yeah, basically, because
Okay.
we don't know.
Yeah,
We
I was
don't
asking
know.
you, did you know?
No,
That's
I
why-
don't
'cause
know. I can give you my ideas. And all I can say is, look, you think if the planet ascends, for whatever reason, say like in a week it ascends, and if you think you're going to ascend, do you understand what ascension means for you? So ascension basically means, what did I say? Like I said, you become a pure channel,
Yeah,
right? So that means all your pain, all your trauma, all your toxins have been transformed.
yeah.
So that means you want all your pain, trauma, and toxins to transform literally overnight or in 3 days or in like 2 weeks.
I would
Do you
love
think that's
that.
going to be comfortable? Do you think you're going to survive that?
No, I would like that, and it.
See, that's the reality of
My-
what people are talking
my
about when they
reality
say,
is-
you know, that.
Yeah, it's little by
Yeah.
little. Is what, when I was first initiated into Kriya, maybe I'd known the monk for 2 or 3 years, but I asked him, I said, can you, about realization, I said, I've heard if the monk, blesses you, that you can have realization. And he wouldn't answer me, but the next morning, of course, I pushed my way up to where the teachers were with my personality. And the next morning, he came in there and he said, within 30 days, you shall experience realization.
Oh,
It was 31 days, and it lasted for about 3 days. It was like a stream
Yeah.
of water, and I was on the side of it, and people and things just was flowing by me.
it's beautiful.
But 3 days, 2 to 3 days. And then I had to come back and do it on my own,
Hmm.
and I hadn't got there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he showed me what,
We can get glimpses,
glimpse.
but
Yeah, but
It's a
I'm not there.
process.
Yeah, the process is hell. It
Exactly.
really, literally is.
exactly.
You lose everything.
You can.
I have
Yeah.
family, money, everything,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. True ascension means death of everything you consider yourself.
Yeah.
Who's going to do that?
Right.
Whether you want it
In
or
3
not,
days
it
too.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens anyway.
You know, and that's what some of these people were, you know, like these old school new age stuff, which is still out there, 3 days, or it's going to send in 3 days. I remember reading that stuff in the 90s. I'm like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah,
But really not knowing what that meant. But that kind of makes you get attached to this thing happening outside of you to save you.
when I was young, when we were gonna have a bad test in school, I said, God, please come tonight. You know, don't let me have
Yeah.
to go to school, take that test. Or when I was in college, I did it too. Take me now, Lord, don't let me take that test. How silly we are.
Well, we've gone really over time, guys. You guys good? Okay. Yeah, I could keep talking, but
Yes, and we can keep.
we should get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Once a month,
Once a month, I will